Before we get to our main event for the evening, let me make an announcement about two forums that we're going to have tomorrow night. We have a double header tomorrow night. First, I'm David Pryor, Director of the Institute of Politics, and we welcome all of you here this evening to hear our outstanding speaker. Tomorrow night at 6 p.m. here in the forum, we will have E.J. Dionne and Bill Kristol. E.J. Dionne, of course, is with the Washington Post, and Bill Kristol is the editor and publisher of the Weekly Standard. So we're going to have two extremes here, right here on the podium tomorrow night in the panel. And we urge you to come, and we know that you will enjoy it if you can have the opportunity to come. Ray Anderson at 8 o'clock is going to be here. Ray Anderson is one of the few green CEOs in America. He has recently been chosen by U.S. News and World Report as one of the 15 top American innovators. And Ray Anderson will be here tomorrow, 8 o'clock. We invite all of you to come and to be a part in that very fine forum at 8 p.m. tomorrow evening. I also want to personally thank Cece Connolly, who has been encouraging us to have this fabulous speaker tonight, Dr. David Kessler. And Cece, thank you. She is with the Washington Post, and she's taking a few weeks off. She's been here since January with us as a fellow, and Cece, we're very indebted to you for helping to make some of these arrangements and for your persistence in making sure that this guy doesn't slip through the noose, and so we can have him on our program here in the forum. I'm going to introduce Dr. Nancy Rigotti in just a moment, but first I would like to say in one brief paragraph about our speaker. So many young people today say, "I just wish I could make a difference." So many young people today say, "I don't have to make a difference, and I don't believe that I can make a difference." Well, tonight our speaker is someone who has made a difference, and he's going to tell you about it. He has made an enormous difference in our country, in our society, and in fact, in the world. To introduce him tonight is Dr. Nancy Rigotti, the Associate Professor of the Harvard Medical School. She runs the Tobacco Research Center at Mass General Hospital, and she is intimately acquainted with this issue. Dr. Nancy Rigotti. Nancy?
It's a pleasure to be here and to have this great honor. And to echo what we've just heard, it is my great honor to introduce someone who is my public health hero, one of my public health heroes. Those of us who go into medicine or public health and people who go into government or journalism often do so because we want to make a difference. It's only, many of us make a difference at the individual level, but not a lot of us get to make a difference in a big way, have the opportunity and the ability to capitalize on it, and to some extent the luck to make big things happen. And Dr. David Kessler has done that. He's really changed the nature of the national policy discussion around tobacco in a big way within the last 10 years. Dr. Kessler, you probably know, is a physician. He's a lawyer. He was a hospital administrator for a while, and in 1990 he became the FDA commissioner appointed by the first President Bush. He was reappointed by President Clinton and stayed in that post until 1996. He did a number of things during that time that were very consumer-oriented and very forward-thinking, but what we're here to talk about tonight is what he did about tobacco, where he really took the lead in looking at nicotine as a drug and doing something that no one else thought was possible, which was to get the FDA to assert jurisdiction over tobacco and to try to regulate this very dangerous product, which we know kills more Americans than any other single thing. Only some of the regulations went into effect because there was a suit by the tobacco industry. Round one was won by the government. Round two at the appellate level was won by the tobacco companies, and as probably most of you know, round three at the level of the Supreme Court was a 5-4 decision favoring the tobacco companies and essentially asserting, and I'm not a lawyer here, but essentially my interpretation was that the FDA had gone beyond its limits gone beyond congressional intent. Dr. Kessler left government service in 1996, went to Yale Medical School, where he's now the dean of the medical school. But he's remained very active in tobacco issues and tobacco advocacy since leaving government service. He was very involved with the discussions when the Senate was considering comprehensive tobacco legislation a couple of years ago. So he's continued to be active. He's here today, I believe, to tell us some of the story. And I've heard this story, and it's a wonderful story about how this all came about. And hopefully in the end, he may also help us look forward to how, in an entirely different environment now than when he stepped on the national scene, where we have a different administration and a lot of things that are different, including a tobacco industry that's talking differently than it used to, in part because of what he's done. Where does he think we're going in the next 5 years? Dr. Kessler.
Dr. Gotti, Senator Pryor, those were wonderful introductions. Let me do this a little differently this afternoon. Let me not just lecture. Let me make sure my microphone is on. Let me introduce you to a young man. You've just arrived. Governor, you've just been named Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration. A graduate of Yale Medical School, no less. His name is Jeff Nesbitt. Nesbitt is 29 years of age. He works for you. He's Associate Commissioner. You notice something about Nesbitt's resume. It's not the traditional Washington resume, because even by the age of 29, Nesbitt has already worked for both Dan Quayle and Ralph Nader. Nesbitt comes up to you and says, Commissioner, I think you should regulate tobacco products. FDA regulates everything else that comes in contact with the body, everything that's put on the skin, everything that's ingested, all food, all drugs, everything that we use in our daily lives in contact with our bodies. I think you should go regulate tobacco. What do you say to Nesbitt? What do you want to do? You've just arrived in Washington. No, you haven't read the book. You're not supposed to have read the book.
I'll think about it.
You'll think about it.
Right.
What is it? Wait. Don't give away the microphone. What do you mean you'll think about it? Is this the classic Washington turf? You're going to think about it?
Yeah, more or less.
Why? Well, why do you want to think about it?
Well, there's been many times previously where that question was posed, and many times previously where commissioners had already answered that question. That
1977, last time when Don Kennedy was commissioner, last looked at it, was sued by the group Action on Smoking and Health. Kennedy looked at it, declined to assert jurisdiction.
That's right, and I think about 6 or 7 times before that.
Why, and you're going to do the same thing?
Well, I'm going to think about it.
You're going to think about it. What do you want to think about? Think out loud. Are you just
I'm going to think
stalling?
about it because I think even though those decisions have been made and there's a historical record, there's also a strong conviction and maybe some evidence, not as strong, that tobacco should be regulated as a drug and that the FDA should have jurisdiction.
But you want to think about it.
Yes, because of the previous historical record.
What are you concerned about?
Concerned about whether making that decision could be politically sustained.
Politically sustained. So you've arrived in Washington, and your first concern on this issue, Dr. Rosenthal, just give him the microphone.
I'll give you the mic.
Any other product come close in the number of deaths compared to tobacco?
Absolutely not.
How risky is it? It really isn't that bad, is it?
Oh, it's awful, David.
Wait a second. How bad is it? I mean, there are a lot of bad things that we all do. If you go to work every day at Philip Morris, You go to work and say, look, people take risks all the time. This product may not be good for you, but it's not as bad as Kessler and those other zealots really talk about, right?
I support David Kessler up to the hilt.
Kills more people each year than, what, AIDS?
It kills more people than any other disease, more than AIDS, so tons more than AIDS.
AIDS, illegal drugs, homicides, fires,
Right,
suicides, highway accidents. Put it all combined, and you want to go think about it. Number one preventable cause of death. So you want to know whether it's politically sustainable. Well, I mean, you work in the executive branch. I mean, you took an oath, right? You're commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, and you want to know whether it's politically sustainable. Because your oath was what? I will well and faithfully do whatever is politically sustainable.
No, because I know, for example, that what is apparently a conviction has to go through a certain process so that it can be, in effect, beneficial to the people. And we've seen many instances of that. The President of the United States took an oath in 1993, and among his commitments was to have a health care reform that covered all Americans. And he's the President of the United States, and
President went out on that issue,
yes,
got killed on that issue.
right.
And the implications for the next person who comes along is, I'm not going to touch that with what? I'm going to take this on or not going to take this on? So if you're concerned already about getting a president out there on this issue.
Yes, you have to be.
But you ready to talk to the president? You're FDA commissioner. How do you think about this? Where do you begin? Where do you begin? What do you tell Nesbitt?
Go check it out.
Go check it out. Nesbitt says, I think you should go regulate this. I don't know how to check it out. All I can tell you is of all the issues that you can possibly take on, this is by far the most important, right? As far as public health. Nothing else comes close. What would you say? What would you say to Nesbitt? What would you say to Nesbitt, Ms. Kalish? Let's do it. So you want to go, you want to stand up, and what do you want to do? So you would hold a press conference and say you want to regulate it?
Yes.
Get the facts. What facts do you want? Where do you start looking?
You've got the facts. You've got all these deaths.
You have all these deaths. So just because you have all these deaths, that means you can go regulate this product, right? The fact that it kills more people.
It's addictive.
It's addictive. That means you can regulate it, right? So you want to just stand up and regulate the product.
You had a commitment to the consumer, to the people of the United States, and that's what it seemed to me drove you. You didn't care if you lost your job. You didn't have any other focus except for the people in the United States and their health.
So the most important thing is, when you're in this kind of job, it's promoting and protecting the public health. Nothing else matters. So you wake up in the morning, if you're FDA commissioner, and you say, I'm going to make a decision, and I'm going to act on what is going to promote and protect the public health, right?
Yes. You may lose your job over it, but you are a lawyer, you're a doctor, you'll find a job.
So you take care of sore throats. So that's where does your authority come from? You wake up in the morning and you say, this is important for public health and I'm going to act on it?
What was the oath that you took?
I will well and faithfully do what? Regulate drugs? No. I will well and faithfully, what is it? Fulfill the duties? No. I will well and faithfully execute the laws. What laws? What laws are we talking about? It's not just waking up in the morning and saying this is in the public health interest. What's the law? What law do you want to look at? Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, enacted 1938, amended several times. What provision of it? So you want to see the definition of a drug. Here's the definition. Let's see. Here's the definition of a drug. Can we take the lights down a little on the podium if it's possible? It's an article other than food intended to affect the structure or any function of the body. Nicotine a drug? Tobacco a drug? Yes. Why? It's a stimulant. It affects the structure and function of the body. So it's a drug, right? Everyone agree? You agree? Absolutely. You agree that it's a drug? It was not intended. Wait, you're general counsel for Philip Morris. There's now that word intended. Whose intent? Courts have interpreted that to be the manufacturer's intent. Philip Morris, what do you intend? You intend its effect as a stimulant?
Well, they withheld all the data.
You're general counsel. You're general counsel. Hand the microphone to C.C. Connolly. You're general counsel. Philip
No,
Morris.
we just want to bring people a little bit of pleasure and a good taste.
You don't intend to affect the structure or function
Not
of
at
the body.
all.
So it's
We
not
want
a drug.
them to relax.
So the issue is not whether you get up in the morning and say, I want to promote the public health. The issue is whether the statute, is that what you have to make it into a drug, or is it a drug? It is a drug. Why is it a drug?
It has both psychologic and physiologic effects. It's a drug because nicotine is found in chewing gum and in the patches you use on your skin, and nicotine in that form is regulated.
No question, you're right. It's used in the gum, the inhaler, and the patch. It's a drug in those instances. You open up a textbook of pharmacology, you look up nicotine, it's there. Goodman and Gilman. So it's a drug, right? Philip Morris, is it a drug? Why? What's your intent?
Our intent is just to allow our customers to relax and unwind with a cigarette.
And nicotine, if it does anything, it gives tobacco a little what?
Yeah, just a little.
Little flavor? Kick? Did I hear you say kick?
No,
Taste.
spice.
Spice. Little flavor, a little taste, right? So it's not a drug. Ask Philip Morris. They don't intend nicotine's effect on the structure or function of the body. The fact that it's in Goodman and Gilman, the fact that if you go down to Countway or go into any medical library, type in the word nicotine, and find thousands of articles on nicotine's effect on the structure or function of the body, that doesn't make it a drug. It's only whether the companies intend nicotine's effect on the structure or function. So what do you got to do?
Plus, we never knew, David.
You never knew what?
We never knew that some people might get hooked on this stuff.
In fact, it's not addictive, right?
We never knew that.
So it's not a drug. So you go home. You tell Nesbitt, sorry, Philip Morris says they don't intend, and therefore you can't meet the definition of a drug. Where do you regulate it as a food? The definition, the statutory definition of a food is, actually it's circular. It's defined as food or drink. So if you look up food, is tobacco a food? No, it's not ingested. Nutrient value? Nutrient value of tobacco? Minimal, right? That it's a food. Yeah. Chew it. Then it's a what? Well, I mean, cigarette? Not ingested. So how do you do that? What's a drug delivery system? I mean, that's the definition of a drug. An article intended to affect the structure or function of the body. That's the way Congress defined a drug. Not the way you or I think about a drug. Not the way any doctor would think about a drug. That's the way Congress intended to. Philip Morris, can we imply intent?
No, we never meant that.
The fact that everyone knows that nicotine affects the structure or function of the body. We can't impute intent to you?
That's news to me.
Is it? Is that relevant? Is that alone enough to make it a drug? Change the definition. Senator Pryor, would you change the definition? You're a senator from North Carolina. Can I get you to change?
I need to check my campaign contributions first.
So it's not going to be that easy to change the definition. But where do you go look? Where do you go? You want to make this into a drug. I want to determine whether this is a drug. What? Go to where? Company documents. Philip Morris, can we see your documents? She wants to see your documents.
They're private.
Please?
No.
You don't have subpoena power. Where can you go look? Where do you go look for evidence of a company's intent? She's not going to show you documents. Advertising. Pick an ad. Pick an ad. Winston.
Tastes good.
Taste. Does that show you effect on structure or function of the body? Does that make it into a drug? Newport. What's it alive with? And you say advertising has no effect on you. That's pleasure. So you can't show me an ad that makes it goes to intent. Where do you go look? Patents. How much information do you put in a patent? You put enough information in order to, can we take that in the lights just a drop? Is that possible? Here are patents you find dating back to the 1960s to add nicotine to the filter and to the paper wrapper around cigarettes. Philip Morris, are you adding nicotine to the filter and to the paper around cigarettes?
No.
That's what these patents call for. They call for the addition of nicotine to the paper wrapper and to the filter.
Well, my recollection is we just took out those patents protectively in case sometime in the future we want to change our product.
So this is just research. You're not actually doing that. You're not actually adding nicotine to the filter or to the wrap. And anyway, nicotine is just in there for
Flavor.
Here's a patent. Is there a pointer? It's, 4 from the bottom. To make high nicotine smoke less harsh by adding an organic acid. Now, that's adding an organic acid to mask the harsh taste of nicotine. I thought you said nicotine was in there for flavor. Why are you masking the harsh taste?
Oh, it's a delicate balance.
You see certain patents for nicotine analogs dating back to the early 1980s. Chemical molecules that are synthesized by Philip Morris having similar structure, not exactly. And the stated purpose in the majority of the patents are for use as an insecticide. Why are you patenting nicotine analogs, Philip Morris?
I don't know. I'd probably have to check with my researchers.
Are you in the insecticide business?
No, of course not.
You see on the top 2 patents in 1991 and 1992, nicotine analogs with tranquilizing effects in mammals.
Well,
But you
we're
said
just
this was
talking
flavor.
about relaxing. People can unwind with a nice cigarette after a meal.
So it does have tranquilizing effects, Philip Morris.
I think it just relaxes people.
It relaxes people, but tranquilizing.
I don't know about that.
But that's what your patents call for these nicotine analogs. Where else do you want to look? You see those patents. An analog is a compound, very similar, analogous chemical structure to nicotine, with all those carbon rings, similar structure, not exactly. So they're a little different. They've changed the molecule bit by bit. These are similar kinds of molecules. It would be months before we would understand the significance of why Philip Morris was synthesizing nicotine-like molecules. Where else do you go? Historical litigation, 1988, Chipolone. You send people off to go look in old documents and start going through old documents. Very little, certainly in public record, by the early 1990s as a result of litigation. Never lost the case, right?
Never, and don't forget we have deep pockets.
Where else do you go? Where else do you go look? Yes, it does. Less than 7% FDA regulates. Greater than 7% BATF regulates. Well, how do you get to, you want to go talk to former employees? So what you want is 1-800 whistleblower, right? You laugh, but that's what the FBI did. There was a 1-800, there was a, how are you going to go find a disgruntled employee? How do those things work? How do you,
Hire some sort of an investigator. Look at who brought suit against their former tobacco company.
you have a couple
employer.
people on your staff who work for you. One is Gary Light and Tom Doyle. Doyle, let me tell you a little about him. New York City transit cop, then went on to law school, then had that period on his resume that's blank for a number of years. You know he was stationed abroad, and he doesn't talk about where he was working. And then he came back, left that agency, and went to work for Secret Service. You want Tom Doyle to work for you? He's at FBI.
He'd be good.
Gary Light is Army CID, Criminal Investigative Division, probably one of the nation's best polygraph experts. You know how polygraph machines work? You put I put the electrodes on you. You think it works. I don't even have to turn on the machine. You think I know what you know, so you start telling me, before I even turn on the machine, you start telling me everything. So polygraphers really are interviewers. I mean, they're wonderful interviewers. You want to send Gary and Tom out and ask them to do what? Find me a whistleblower. They're out, go and look for whistleblowers. Where else do you want to look?
Hire Gordon Liddy. We're off budget, you know.
You don't do
Looking
those
for-
things when you're in the federal government, do you? You're out looking for whistleblowers. Okay. Where else do you want to look?
What about other countries where this kind of information might happen more public?
Where do you want to go look?
I'm not sure that maybe there are other countries where this kind of information is forced to be more public than the U.S.
Do you start searching all securities filings? You start searching records. You send a colleague down, actually it was a summer student, down to North Carolina State Library, tobacco literature. Tell her to wear jeans and a backpack, because actually the librarians at North Carolina State weren't too friendly at the time. She comes back with an ad that is in one of the tobacco throwaways, and it calls for more or less nicotine. Kimberly Clark, a French subsidiary, LTR Industry. And it says in the fine print, nicotine levels are becoming increasingly an important part of cigarette manufacture. And it talks about how you can adjust the nicotine levels. It calls for more or less nicotine. That's their process, Kimberly Clark. This is about 1992, 1993. You see this ad in a magazine called World Tobacco. Why is this relevant? What are they doing here? They're what? They're manipulating the dose. So the reason why manipulation is important, it goes to the question of intent. Philip Morris, are you manipulating the level of nicotine in cigarettes?
No, I don't know anything about that company.
You don't, but you don't manipulate the level of nicotine in cigarettes.
Oh, no, we don't. We have our secret recipe for flavor.
And in fact, the companies write you and tell you that they can prove they're not manipulating nicotine levels because since the 1950s, tar levels have dropped, and so too have nicotine levels. And the companies say they've dropped proportionally. As tar has dropped, nicotine levels have dropped, and that's proof we're not manipulating nicotine levels. You call over your sister agency, the FTC, and say, send us all your tar and your nicotine numbers. They have it back to 1982, and you see, in fact, the tar levels have dropped. It's on a sales-weighted basis. Since 1982, tar levels have dropped, but nicotine levels have increased. Why are nicotine levels, what's going on here? Are you manipulating the level of nicotine in cigarettes? Why is tar dropping? What's the scientific definition of tar? It's all that gunk that collects on a piece of filter paper when you put the filter paper in front of a cigarette, and it collects everything that comes out of the smoking the end that you inhale. What's one of the components of tar? Nicotine. So if you're taking out tar, you're also taking out nicotine. But they're not dropping proportionally. Most important article on smoking and health, written in what journal? Dr. Rosenthal, what journal? When do you think? New England Journal? Nope. Where was it published? Nope. Science? Nope. 1952. Nope.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Reader's Digest.
Reader's Digest. Link between smoking
And
and health 12 years before the Surgeon General, Luther Terry Surgeon General report. What did the industry do after that Reader's Digest article came out? What did they put in front of cigarettes? What does the filter take out? What does the filter take out?
Tar.
What else does it take out? Why do people smoke? Nicotine. What do you got to do if you're taking out the nicotine? You got to dial it up. Are you dialing it up?
No, we just have a much higher quality leaf now.
A higher quality leaf. 3 brands, light cigarettes. They're light in what? What else are they light in? 3 brands of Merit. Merit regular, Merit light, Merit ultralight. You send it to your lab. Merit regular has 1.46% nicotine. Merit light has 1.67% nicotine. And Merit ultralight has 1.99% nicotine on a concentration basis. What's the route of administration of nicotine replacement? What are the methods of replacement available for nicotine or what?
The patch, the gum, etc.
What's the rate of the rate of rise of nicotine concentration through the skin, through ingestion, compared to inhalation, which is very fast? You can't mimic that rate of inhalation.
But they don't seem to enjoy it. It seems to me if smoking was simply a delivery system for nicotine, then these therapies that the pharmacological companies are producing would be just as satisfying to those people who smoke as the cigarette is.
But you can't, if you in fact substitute intravenous nicotine, you get the same level of satisfaction as far as craving. But you have to do it by IV route.
Well, I mean, people smoke pipes and seem to enjoy them very much, but they don't enjoy, as I say, they don't enjoy these replacement therapies.
If you want to find a replacement therapy where the satisfaction is the same as far as showing satisfaction for craving a cigarette, unfortunately, you got to go to the IV route.
So they're not really replacement.
Not
in that
yet.
sense.
I mean, they're better products, but the route of administration, the nicotine spray, is probably the fastest route.
The nasal spray.
The nasal spray
Yes.
actually burns the mucosa.
Right, it's
People
irritating.
continue to use it, even the fact that once they
Right, when you see the drug company videos, when they try to sell the stuff, even talk to you about how horrible it is, you figure if the drug companies are telling you how bad it is, it must be pretty awful.
but they continue to use it. But let's go back to the data. Light cigarettes, 1.99% nicotine. What's going on here? Why? The heaviest concentration of nicotine. Philip Morris, you manipulating the level of, how do you in fact get there? How does that happen? Different blends of leaf, higher up on the stalk you go, higher nicotine levels, different crop varieties, different stalk positions, different years.
Yeah, but we're just doing that for flavor.
That's just for flavor. Your lab also tells you something else. It tells you for it's measured cigarette, nicotine levels in cigarettes. Normally your lab measures drug, it's a drug analysis lab, active ingredient, it says, you know, we noticed something. The nicotine content from cigarette to cigarette to cigarette is more uniform than the average active ingredient from pill to pill to pill, to 4 decimal places. It's more uniform. But that's just for flavor.
Yep. North
That-
Carolina has some wonderful tobacco farmers.
Gary and Tom come back and tell you they have an informant, but he's only willing to talk to you. He's only going to willing to talk to the commissioner. He's not willing to talk to anyone else. What do you say to Gary, and what does that tell you about the informant? He's only going to talk to you, only wants to talk to the commissioner. You willing to talk to him, Governor?
Not sure.
Why are you concerned?
Well, this is a very sensitive issues, and you cannot tell beforehand whether this is a valid or a person that is going to talk to you to, in essence, support what you're looking for, or if this is maybe some sort of trick.
Could be a trick, could be a setup. In fact, your investigators told you not to meet with him. What do you got to lose? What do you got to lose? He's going to go. He can go out tomorrow. He could talk to you, and then what can he do? The next person he talks to is what? You're general counsel to Philip Morris. Washington Post.
Right, to the press.
Right? So you want to talk to him? I agreed to talk to him. I'm sitting around the table from him. I'm looking for other leads. I'm asking him who else might talk to us. He said, do you know this person? Do you know that person? So-and-so going to talk to us. Then I look at him and I say, who's Jeffrey Wigand? He smiles. I only know him by his code name, Research. He smiles and at me and he says, I'm Jeffrey Wigand. I was looking for the leads for other names. I was trying to get other names of other people who might talk to us. I had you had a telephone book, had a company telephone book, and I'm sitting there literally going through names to see who might be other leads. And I asked him, who's Jeffrey Wigand? Now, you have to understand, our investigators really had a heads up, over me, because he had a briefcase, and on his briefcase that was sitting on the floor was JW. So I was the only. Wigand tells you, very scared. Okay? Can I talk to your former employees, Philip Morris? Is that okay?
No. absolutely
Wigand's
not.
very scared. The one thing about all the informants, very, very scared. Wigand tells you to go look for patents filed in foreign countries. You find a Brazilian patent for a genetically bred, genetically engineered high nicotine tobacco, code named Y1, that's 6% nicotine. Normal flue curd has 3% nicotine. Genetically bred high nicotine tobacco. It's a Brazilian patent. Tobacco industry, you genetically engineering tobacco to have high nicotine levels?
No, that's Brazil.
That's Brazil. You're not bringing it into this country. What do you do? Where do you go look? Trade records. How many entries every day into the United States? Zillion. You send your agents up and down, one agent up and down the ports of call of the southeast United States, and you ask them to look for what? You look for Brazilian tobacco. He's going through documents. He's looking for manifests. You're looking for evidence of what? Y1. You're not bringing Y1 into the United States.
No.
On page 25, out of 1 million pages of manifest from Sousa Cruz Overseas through the Grand Cayman Islands to Brown & Williamson Tobacco Company, it's highlighted there, your order, Project Y1.
Oh, those Brown and Williamson boys, they're a whole nother kettle of fish.
You're not doing this.
No.
You're now Brown & Williamson. You doing this? But
That's confidential.
500,000 pounds coming into the United States.
Yeah, it could be a mistake.
You're going to be testifying in 2 days under oath. Are you using genetically engineered high nicotine tobacco in American cigarettes? I have 5 other invoices for a total of 6.5 million pounds. You're going to be testifying under oath in 2 days.
I don't think we have to answer that.
This is your chance to fess up. You want to talk to counselor? You want to talk to your lawyer?
Yeah, I don't think we need to divulge that information. We're a private company.
At that point, Brown & Williamson admits to bringing in, using genetically engineered high nicotine tobacco in 5 plants, in 5 brands of cigarettes. That, in fact, was the reason why they ended up not being indicted, because when pressed, they fessed up. Genetically engineered high nicotine, why are you using genetically engineered high nicotine tobacco? You've admitted that you're using it. You're manipulating the nicotine levels in cigarette. Is that correct?
Okay, yes, I've admitted it.
But you're only doing it for what?
I'm sure it's flavor.
Here is a marketing document from R.J. Reynolds. Reynolds is losing market share from its brand, Winston, which is in the solid line, to Philip Morris's brand, Marlboro. Reynolds is losing market share. It's convinced something's going on here, and it's not just the cowboy. Top graph, pH is on the axis. You see the pH of Winston. You see the pH of Marlboro. What's going on here? Reynolds, the higher pH is in Philip Morris's brand. You anonymously receive things really do happen this way, an white envelope, and in it is a tobacco company handbook on leaf blending. It says the ammonia in cigarette smoke can liberate free nicotine from the blend, which is associated with increases in impact and satisfaction. What's ammonia? To base. What's freebasing? How does freebasing work? It's changed. So it's a stronger hit because you change the charge on the molecule. You use a base. So Reynolds sees here that increased base in Marlboro. Philip Morris, are you freebasing your cigarettes?
No.
You're using more ammonia. You're increasing the pH. Calculate the amount of free nicotine. Increases in what? Free nicotine gets to your brain much better than any of the replacement products, right? Much better than even Reynolds cigarette, if you can change the pH, the charge on the molecule. Here's a marketing document from, I don't know if we can take down, on the top, it's from United States Tobacco. This is smokeless tobacco. On the very top, which you can't see, it says Copenhagen. What do you notice about this marketing document? It's Copenhagen. This is all made by United States Tobacco. What are bandits? Little pouches. Easier to use. What do you notice about those bandits? What do you notice? There's also a cherry flavor. They're flavored. What other word do you see? Someone said it. Graduation. Who's graduating? Higher to higher. So if you send this to the lab, you expect lower to higher in the level of nicotine in these products, right? Nope, doesn't. Not when you measure total nicotine. What do you got to measure? You got to measure free nicotine. And pH, correlation is perfect, lowest to highest. What's the evidence you have so far? You have patents, but you're not using those. You have light cigarettes having the highest concentration of nicotine, but that may just be for flavor. You have genetically engineered high nicotine tobacco, again just for flavor, and you're not really freebasing your cigarettes.
No, we never intended
It's all
for
for
anybody
flavor,
to get
right?
hooked.
Based on the evidence you have so far, how many would say that nicotine is a drug? 1. It wasn't until relatively late, when you think about it, (1988), 24 years after the Luther Terry Surgeon General's report, C. Everett Koop, relatively recently, said that nicotine meets the definition of an addictive substance. What's that one image, more than anything else, that changed the debate on tobacco over the last decade? What would you guess? 7 executives saying what? I believe nicotine is not addictive. We turn off the lights, and this is we'll see whether we can see it. This is an internal Philip Morris. Let's turn off the slide projector. I'm going to put that on. It may not show. This is a internal Philip Morris videotape. Steve Parrish, 1994.
Hello, I'm Steve Parrish. As many of you know, Dr. David Kessler, Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, has been testifying before Congress. The issue is whether the FDA has or should be granted the jurisdiction to regulate cigarettes as drugs. Dr. Kessler's 2 appearances before the Subcommittee on Health and the Environment have received a tremendous amount of media coverage. Many of Dr. Kessler's comments contained untruths, distortions, and factual errors. We want to set the record straight. So we've taken key points from Dr. Kessler's testimony, which we will pause and correct with the facts. Here are excerpts from Dr. Kessler's first appearance on Capitol Hill, March 25th.
Mr. Chairman, the issue I will address today is simple. Whose choice is actually driving the demand for cigarettes in this country?
In an effort to assert jurisdiction over cigarettes, Dr. Kessler has alleged that nicotine is addictive and that cigarette manufacturers control the level of nicotine that satisfies that addiction. But smoking has been called addictive by some people, largely because the concept of addiction has expanded over the past 30 years. It is now applied to such diverse activities as TV watching, shopping, gambling, exercise, and sex, despite the fact that such pastimes involve no drug use at all. We believe that nicotine in cigarettes does not meet the classic definition and common sense notions of addiction for the following reasons. There is no longer any consensus within the scientific community regarding the term addiction. Cigarette smoking is not associated with intoxication. The supposed nicotine withdrawal syndrome is neither medically threatening nor an effective barrier to cessation. Over time, smokers maintain a fairly steady or declining level of consumption. Over 38 million smokers have quit smoking, nearly all on their own without professional help. The assertion that cigarettes are as addictive or more addictive than heroin or cocaine is not reasonable. And under traditional definitions of addiction, focusing on the pharmacological phenomena of intoxication, tolerance, and withdrawal, cigarette smoking should not now be classified as addictive. We believe that Dr. Kessler has described nicotine as addictive in order to justify his own political agenda. That is to satisfy his theory of jurisdiction under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, so that his agency will have the authority to regulate and possibly ban nicotine-containing cigarettes.
Absolutely.
Researchers at Harvard, and all of them were had very different opinions on what addiction is. One of the researchers asked, is dice addictive? There was a quotation recently on television of a man who said gambling was more addictive. He wished he had an addiction to heroin rather than gambling. Is the internet addictive? I think the American Psychiatric Association has stopped using the word. And in addition to that, in the 1964 Surgeon General's report, when the addiction definition was different, it was categorically stated that tobacco was not addictive.
I knew there was a reason why I was in New Haven and not in Boston. I mean, if that's what every single medical organization that has looked at the question, you saw the list, has concluded.
Dr. Kessler, is the internet addictive?
It does not, as far as I know, it doesn't have a chemical effect on the brain. It doesn't affect nicotine receptors on the brain the way nicotine does.
Is tea and coffee addictive?
Certainly, caffeine does have an effect on the brain, but the capture rate, of caffeine is infinitesimal compared to the effect of nicotine. The capture rate of nicotine is about 85%. Number of people who smoke more than 20 cigarettes a day.
Last question. All of us who are over the age of 30 know at least a dozen people who have stopped smoking without nicotine patches, without detox centers, etc.
For every person who has successfully quit, 9 have tried and failed to do that.
Well, I mean, I just know from...
This is the issue of, nicotine, the argument that companies have used for decades is what? This is an issue of choice. There's something more important than public health, right? The fact that it kills
Depends
more
on your
people...
definition of public health.
But there's something more important. This is an issue about what? Freedom. This is an issue of choice. If you go to work every day at Philip Morris, you believe, you look at yourself in the mirror how? There's something more important, right? This is about liberty. They hired the psychoanalyst A.A. Brill in the 1920s. They were what? Symbols of freedom, torches of liberty. That's what this is an issue about. It's adults who smoke, right?
Well, I don't know how far the public health profession is going to go to suppress smoking, but you don't have all the power in the world, and I don't think...
Is it a drug? Is nicotine a drug under the Act?
Well, I think a drug is anything that you inject into a rat which produces two scientific
Is nicotine
papers.
a drug? If you ask the tobacco companies whether nicotine is a drug, based on the evidence you have now, is nicotine a drug? Who says no? Based on the evidence I've given you. What other evidence do you want? What else do you have to be able to show whether nicotine is a drug under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act?
Well, I think it has to do with intent.
But how are you going to show that? I've showed you evidence of manipulation. I've showed you patents adding nicotine to filters, and to the paper. I've showed you use of genetically engineered. I've shown you use of chemicals to increase the impact. What other evidence do you want?
Go back to the definition. What does the intent have to be? The intent to do what?
Affect the structure or function. What other evidence do you want?
What if you could say that the intent is to sell your product? And that people...
So you want to be able to
make
show...
a more enjoyable product.
What do you want to be able to show to establish whether it is a drug under the Act? What other evidence would you like than what I presented you? Cause and effect. You want to see it in her words directly? Laboratory studies. Your investigators come back and they found another informant. They codenamed, you can tell we weren't the FBI, they named one informant Cigarette, and the research assistant Cigarette Jr. Cigarette tells you that he worked for Philip Morris between 1980 and 1984. His job, he was a behavioral psychologist. His job was to determine whether rats will self-administer nicotine, pushing the lever for nicotine over food and water. He found that rats, in fact, did self-administer nicotine, self-administration being one of the tests that NIDA, DEA, and FDA use to determine whether a substance should be controlled or scheduled, whether it is in fact addictive. And he also tells you, you know those nicotine analogs, those patents? His job at Philip Morris was to find a nicotine-like compound that was as reinforcing, if not more reinforcing, in animal laboratory tests. If the government ever asked Philip Morris to take nicotine out of cigarettes, they wanted to have something that was as reinforcing, if not more reinforced. You have self-administration being recognized as one of the hallmarks of an addictive substance. You have that evidence. What other evidence do you want?
Circulated at a high enough level within the organization that perhaps the company's true intent would be stated in layman's terms.
Can we take down the lights just a drop? It is my conviction that nicotine is a very remarkable, beneficent drug. It both helps the body to resist external stress and also can, as a result, show a pronounced tranquilizing effect. Written in 1962 by the senior scientist of the board of British American Tobacco. So Charles went on, nicotine is not only a very fine drug, but the techniques of administration by smoking has considerable psychological advantage and a built-in control against excessive absorption. What do you have to say, Philip Morris? That's just Brown and Williamson, right? That's not you. General Counsel, Brown and Williamson, 1963, but we didn't get our hands on it till 1994. His words, not mine. We are then in the business of selling nicotine, an addictive drug. What do you think, Philip Morris? Your company, Philip Morris, 1969, the vice president to the board of directors of Philip Morris. We are of the conviction that the ultimate explanation for the perpetuated cigarette habit resides in the pharmacological effect of smoke upon the body of the smoker. Senior scientist at Philip Morris, 1972. Think of the cigarette pack as a storage container for a day's supply of nicotine. Think of the cigarette as a dispenser for a dose unit of nicotine. Think of a puff of smoke as the vehicle for nicotine. Smoke is beyond question the most optimized vehicle of nicotine. Reynolds. In a sense, the tobacco industry may be thought of as being a specialized, highly ritualized, and stylized segment of the pharmaceutical industry. Tobacco products uniquely contain and deliver nicotine, a potent drug with a variety of physiological effects. Key industry officials knew that nicotine was a drug and said it several decades before FDA.
Yeah, it's clearly a drug, but I think when the first stage of this process, when you were asked whether you wanted to regulate it or not, it seemed like you leaped over this question. What does that mean? Does regulation mean banning? Does regulation mean...
What are you going to do with a product 50 million Americans use? That's the easy part, saying it's a drug.
Right.
What are you going to do about a product that has 35 to 45 million of people who are addicted?
Right, and I think the fear is that you will move to some prohibition scheme, which will be not that different.
What is the right regulatory approach?
Well, what is your intention at the very beginning before you begin this process? What are the
First
end goals?
The question was, is nicotine a drug under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act? First question is, does it meet the definition of drug? Your question is, what do you do about it once you say it's a drug? What's the right regulatory approach? That came out of the second part of our investigation into the marketing practice. Who smoked at the turn of the previous century? Who did the industry target? The death rate. The graph starts in the 1950s. It goes to the 1990s. The top two lines are the age-adjusted death rate of breast cancer, relatively flat. The exponential curve, the incidence of lung cancer in women. It has surpassed the level of breast cancer, and it still has not peaked. Who did the industry target in the 1970s and 1980s? Reynolds, 1984. Young smokers have been the critical factor in the growth and decline of every major brand and company over the last 50 years. Realistically, if our company is to survive and prosper over the long term, we must get our share of the youth market. Reynolds went on, evidence is now available to indicate that the 14 to 18-year-old group is an increasing segment of the smoking population. RJR must soon establish a successful new brand in this market if our position in the industry is to be maintained over the long term. Are you marketing to teenagers? Are you marketing to children? That's just some rogue employee.
Sure. Or that's your interpretation of the ads, but we're not targeting those kids.
A memo says the base of our business is the high school student. Is that true?
That was one of those overeager salespeople.
In face of juries and judges and the American public for decades, this is not only an issue of choice, this is an issue that who smokes? It's adults. Adults make the decision to smoke. What I didn't understand, even as a pediatrician, is that if you can get a young person to the age of 19, 20, and 21, and they've never begun, and it's true of illegal drugs, alcohol, and tobacco, it is unlikely that they ever will begin. People don't start, for the most part, smoking at 22, 23, and 24. Nicotine addiction begins as a pediatric disease. If you listen to only one quote, Reynolds, written back in the 70s, we didn't see it till the 1990s. If we are to attract the non-smoker or pre-smoker, who's the non-smoker or pre-smoker? There is nothing in this type of product that he would currently understand or desire. Instead, we somehow must convince him with wholly irrational reasons that he should try smoking. And convince them they did, certainly through the last 5 decades. We didn't win in the Supreme Court. We lost 5-4. First question out of Sandra Day O'Connor. Nicotine is no more addictive than a horror movie. Horror movie gets your adrenaline pumping. Didn't win in Congress. We turn off the lights. I want to show you Steve Parrish and me at the Reagan Library several months ago. Something happened to change who's calling for regulation.
But you had an epiphany this week, and it's been developing. And the epiphany is, executive says Philip Morris is open to some regulation. Is this a genuine epiphany, or are you going to plead the Lord made me do it, the devil made me do it?
Well, I will tell you that it is a honestly held, good faith belief on my part that there needs to be more than just some regulation at the federal level of the tobacco industry. There needs to be serious regulation of the tobacco industry at the federal level. And the way I get there is much the same way that Dr. Kessler talked to the Congress of the United States a number of years ago, when he said, here we have a legal product, tobacco, which is addictive, which causes harm in some of the people who use it. The question is, how are we going to regulate it in a way that doesn't create chaos in this country, because you have tens of millions of people who use it, and at the moment it's a legal product. So what I think we need to do, and this is what I was saying the other day to a couple of reporters, was I think that there needs to be a serious discussion by a lot of people, members of Congress, people in this room, other members of the public health community, about what is the right way to regulate tobacco, because it is a unique product, it presents a unique set of challenges, and ultimately the Congress of the United States needs to decide how to regulate it, but I believe it does need to be regulated.
Dr. Kessler.
Last week, Philip Morris pushing for FDA regulation. I've now worked for regulation for about 8 years. Couldn't get the Congress to do it, couldn't get the Supreme Court to do it. Now Philip Morris wants to do it. Why does he want to do it? Why does he want regulation? $146 billion. What is he trying to buy? Why does this get him protection? You want to give it to him? What does it give him? What? They want to get it. They want to get the stamp of legitimacy. The one thing that's more important than any court cases or any regulations, the thing that they've been measuring for decades. What? Social acceptability. What does this buy him? You give it to him? You won't regulate the product. What's the end game? That's what he's trying to figure out. I mean, I wrote a book. It was nice. Business Week called it that I had pioneered an oxymoronic genre, the policy thriller. I'm sitting there with Parrish, and we're actually talking the last chapter of the book, and we're in a coffee shop, in southern part of Connecticut. And I said, what did we get right? He says, when you have a product that harms people, kills people, and is addictive, I think what you do is you regulate it. And you regulate it tightly. Sitting there going, am I hearing this right? The next time somebody comes up to you and presents something to you, and everyone says, it's going to be hard to do, what everyone said to Nesbitt, you can't do that. When I looked at him at first, I thought he was crazy. Got the same answer wherever he went. You can't do it. They're too big. They're too powerful. It's a fool's errand. In some ways, they were right. They got the Congress to cut our budget on the, we wanted a new facility. They got Congress to investigate us. There was an Operation Rainmaker, Philip Morris. They wanted to buy certain media outlets, UPI, in order to control the press. Sometimes it sounds like a fool's errand, but you need to listen. And remember Jeff Nesbitt. Just sometimes, what seems impossible at first turns out to be something different. Thank you very much.
Very nice. We have a little time for questions. I actually would like to start and ask the question that he said. He said it's time to regulate tobacco. What is the right way to regulate tobacco now that, in a way, it's a different ballgame? You don't have to convince them that it's bad. They're saying that now. Would you regulate it the same way you tried to do it before? What would you do?
At first, he wanted immunity. That was the first deal in the settlement, and we put our bodies on the line. And I didn't realize really what was going on until Herb Wachtel, who was the lawyer around the table, kept on saying, peace now, peace forever. And that's their end game. They want some social acceptability. I think it's still, despite the fact that Philip Morris wants it, and actually I commend them for taking that step, they are looking for an end game. I'm not sure the type of regulation that he wants and the type of regulation that I think should be. He wants newer products. He wants to be able to stabilize his products as they are now. I do think it's very important to make it harder for kids to buy cigarettes. I think you want to reduce the appeal. I think in the end, I think we're going to see something play out that no one's expecting. If you own a tobacco company and you're a major American company, tobacco's a liability. If you're Philip Morris, your stock price is worth 2-3 times. Even if they're doing better today, you're worth 2-3 times to your shareholders without tobacco. Tobacco is a tar baby. They got to spin it off. And the question then becomes, how do they spin it off? And it's true for Lorillard. Lowe's is worth much more. Reynolds, Philip Morris. Brown & Williamson is the odd man out because BAT has sold everything. It sold all its insurance. It really is just tobacco. It wasn't where I started. I think the real issue here is the profit. I think some way, if they're going to spin it out, this notion of continuing to sell a product, continuing to make a profit that's poured back into the promotion and the defense of the product, somehow you got to be able to take the profits out of this product. You got to continue to make cigarettes available. Prohibition will not work, but if we can continue to make it available without a big profit incentive, I think in the end, I think that makes the most sense. And I would give them immunity for that if they would spin it off and turn it over to some nonprofit, private not-for-profit corporation. Can you make it available but take the profits out of this product? They understand that their internal documents show that taxing it higher reduces the number of young people who buy it. It's the most effective weapon if you want to reduce youth consumption.
Okay, let's go to the microphone.
Okay, I'm Karen Kalish, a student here at the Kennedy School, and I'm curious about the Attorneys General's lawsuits and how that fit into this whole thing. And my second question is, where do you see us in 5 years with this issue?
I had mixed feelings about the settlement because in some ways, it gave the industry something it wanted. It gave them stability. It sort of ended, in some parameters, the discussion. And they thought, now we can go on. And I think many in Congress and even in the press, there's a settlement. Let's move on to something else. This is a chipping away process. So I have mixed feelings. I think that there's a lot of good work. A lot of the documents came out of Hubert Humphrey's lawsuit. I think the settlements had good, and they also had some things that were not so good. In 5 years, I think you will see a heavily regulated product. Maybe it'll take a little more than 5 years. There will be a Congress, not this one, maybe not the next one, but that will heavily regulate this product. And you'll see Philip Morris wanting to get out of the business. You can't be in the tobacco business and be a major American corporation and face liability that they face. The $146 billion, the reason they want regulation is that they know that they are facing potential bankruptcy.
Hi, Dr. Kessler. First of all, thanks for a great format. That was great. For my question, I want to ask, first of all, if you can forget that you're a lawyer for a minute and just focus on yourself as the doctor, the medical doctor, and answer, is it in the public interest for you to have to go through this process of almost a criminal investigation of intent on something that seemingly should be a scientific or a medical question and not a political or criminal one?
I agree with the initial, I think when you take these jobs, and in the very beginning, it was a job to me. And that's why I viewed it as a job. I lobbied for the job, and I wanted the job. You get these jobs, and the question is, what do you do with these jobs once you get these jobs? And that more than anything else is what I learned. But I also learned that you just don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to protect and promote the public health. I am very respectful to the way Congress wrote the laws. Our job was to enforce those laws. I still believe, despite what Justice O'Connor said, I still believe that we showed that nicotine is a drug. So I don't have a problem with enforcing the laws.
But to focus on intent rather than, is it a harm to the American public?
Look, we didn't realize it. I mean, in writing the book, I found this presentation of Murray Brink to the Philip Morris Board of Directors. He said, this is ominous, very early on in our investigation. He understood how dangerous our investigation was, because he understood we were aimed at the heart of the industry. Because if you look at the defense of the industry, it's been built up over the years. This is an issue of choice. This is adults who smoke. But once you conclude that it is children who are becoming addicted, no one picks up a cigarette and says, I'm going to smoke this one and 400,000 more. If you want to know whether something's addictive, I mean, look at the number of times somebody, picks up a cigarette, despite the real health risks, a day. I mean, what other thing does someone do 20, 30, 40 times a day, whether it's enjoyable or not enjoyable? We were aimed at the heart of the industry. We didn't know that. But the fact is, we were aimed at their defense, because it's not adults who start to smoke, it's children who start to smoke. And they don't only start to smoke, but they become addicted as children. That's why this started unraveling. And Philip Morris knew that before we knew it. We didn't realize we were aimed at the heart of the industry.
Dr. Kessler, my name is Andrew Perito. I'm a senior at the college. You mentioned that you think that cigarettes may still be around. There are millions and millions of people who are addicted to nicotine and who need some way to feed that addiction. And I'm wondering what you think the role may be for other less harmful methods of delivering nicotine, whether that's smokeless tobacco, as we've seen in Sweden, or other new drug products, new maybe tobacco or nicotine products that could reduce the health risk associated with nicotine maintenance, looking forward to nicotine cessation.
We have a real expert on the panel. The newer products?
There are a lot of newer products, yeah.
How effective?
None of them, well, there are different kinds of products. There are the products that the tobacco industry is making, and then there are the products that the drug companies are making. And they're they're in a different playing field. So far, none of the tobacco industry's products that they've launched have succeeded in the marketplace. So they haven't succeeded as consumer products. But eventually, they're likely to get something right. And when that's the case, they're going to surely want to be able to sell it as a reduced harm product, and that's when they're going to need regulation.
Is there such a thing as a reduced harm product?
I think, yeah, I think there probably is, in the sense that there's not a no-harm product as far as we know, but there's a relationship, there's a graded curve. Even that's true for the amount of smoking, that there's a dose-response curve.
I certainly won't leave it up to the tobacco companies to decide whether something is a lower risk product. I think that's going to, I mean, that's obviously the field of regulation that they want to deal with. I think you're going to find newer substances that are more effective in replacing nicotine. Look, it's not the nicotine alone that's a problem. It's all the baggage that's associated with that nicotine when you smoke a cigarette.
Right.
So the question is, how do you replace that nicotine? The problem, as we talked about, is inhalation is the most effective route of administration, and we've not been able to mimic that yet.
I also want to thank you for a wonderful, thought-provoking format. It was great. And I want to ask you a couple of questions that you mentioned things. One, when you were talking about ruts, and that was your definition of addiction, that the rat would self-administer it. You're probably well aware that the rat would self-administer sugar water as well. And then how far do you go with addiction? Are we addicted to sugar? I mean, where do you stop? And sort of in the same type of thought, for some reason when you were talking, I happen to have a friend who's addicted to chamomile tea. Is chamomile a drug as well? How far do we go? Where do we stop?
I mean, it is a good point. I think we are learning much more about the molecular biology of addiction. The receptors on CNS cells, and I think we will, I think one day we will be able to tell you the location of those receptors in the brain and actually how those agents work on those receptors to influence that gene expression that stimulates what we know as craving. And certain things will we'll be able to show affect the CNS directly, and I think those will be the pharmacological agents. I mean, and then there's a lot of things that certainly do have indirect effect.
But until then, where do you differentiate between a craving and addiction, and what's drug, what's not a drug? You're certainly not going to start regulating chamomile.
Well, there are criteria that are pretty well established for dependence syndromes, and it's been shown pretty clearly that that tobacco fits those, that nicotine fits those criteria, and that other things like chamomile tea don't.
I've sat in call-in shows on the radio, and people call up, and you almost don't believe it. They say, I've been hooked on cocaine, on heroin, and nicotine. I've been able to give up the cocaine and heroin. I can't give up the nicotine. And you go, wow, that doesn't make sense. But in fact,
yeah. Although I have to admit, I've always had trouble with that in the sense that if nicotine were as difficult to get and illegal, and I think if it had the same social context as heroin, perhaps it would be different. I'm not sure.
But people talk about being able to give up the cocaine and heroin, and they cannot give up the nicotine.
But if smoking a cigarette, you had to be an outlaw, and you had to pay a lot of money, then I think they might find it easier to give up. So I think there's a social context. We have time for one more question, and then I understand Dr. Kessler has to leave because he has to catch a plane.
Hi, Dr. Kessler. I'm one of your
lucky
students
one.
at Yale. I'm just curious as to what you think the fallout internationally has been of the tobacco debate in this country, and whether tobacco companies are going to go to developing nations and target people there, and what the responsibility of this country is.
No question. I mean, when we went to Kosovo, a number of students went. Macedonia, we landed in Macedonia. The first sign that I saw was "Welcome to Marlboro Country," and there you see 11, 12-year-olds on the street. I mean, selling cigarettes. It is a major problem. Look, the fact is, we need to understand that we still are a public health leader in this world. I mean, and if we can grapple with this effectively in this country, I think we can show by example. But you are right. The amount of death and disability, generally viewed as being exported by American companies into Southeast Asia, when that hits in 20, 30 years, I mean, the view will be that America exported that product. So it gives us there's reason for great concern. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kessler. Thanks a lot. That was great.